Hello everyone. Today I will be discussing the somatosensory pathway and prosthetics that have been created to help those that have unfortunately gone through some kind of spinal cord injury, whether that may be a severe car accident or a birth defect. So to begin our discussion, I'd like to briefly go over the basic senses. So we have our sense of sight, hearing, olfaction, or a sense of smell, taste, proprioception, or our sense of touch. So to get started, I'd like to briefly go over how our brain interprets our sense of touch. And the way it does that is through the dorsal column medial lemniscus pathway. So this is the sensory pathway of the central nervous system that interprets our sense of touch, proprioception, two-point discrimination, and vibrations from the skin and joints. It is an ascending pathway, which means that sensory information travels up the spinal cord to the brain for further interpretation. So this occurs in a 3-neuron chain of events, and what happens is receptor from the skin travels up to the spinal cord, to the medulla, and finally to the cortex. The final destination is the somatosensory cortex located in the postcentral gyrus. So if we take a closer look at how our brain interprets our sense of touch, cutaneous mechanoreceptors on the skin surface respond to external stimuli. So whether that may be us holding a pencil or somebody next to us touching our fingertips. When a first order neuron is stimulated by the environment, it enters ipsilaterally into the white matter of the spinal cord. So ipsilaterally means that it enters on the same side of the body, and the white matter is basically the highway to the brain, and it would be the alpha beta afferent axon pathway. When the first order neuron reaches the medulla, it synapses with a second order neuron. And at this point, that second order neuron crosses over to the other side of the body. And now that it's on the other side of the body, it continues to the thalamus. And at that point, the second order neuron synapses with the third order neuron, and the third order neuron continues to travel up to its final destination, which, as we discussed previously, would be the somatosensory cortex of the postcentral gyrus. So if we take a closer look at what the final destination looks like, this on the right is a cortical homunculus map, which highlights which parts of the somatosensory cortex detect sensations from different areas of the body. For example, there's an area that is responsible for detecting sensations from fingers, the thumbs, the eyes, the nose, so on and so forth. So now we've discussed what the somatosensory pathway looks like. But now I'd like to carry this discussion on to what happens when there's a disruption of the somatosensory pathway. And that's mainly the case for tetraplegic or amputated patients. So the field of neuroprosthesis is a field that dedicates its research to create devices that can overcome problems associated with spinal cord injuries. So for example, prosthetic hands would fall under this category. Recent scientific advancements have been able to give a human touch to prosthetic hands, which is really great because it gives a man-made object the ability to feel what normal hands can feel. So to further examine the field of neuroprosthesis, I found a very interesting article that discusses restoring the sense of touch with a prosthetic hand through a brain interface. The authors use intracortical microstimulations, or ICMS, of the somatosensory cortex to elicit feeling in a patch of skin. In other words, it means that the authors manipulate the neurons in the brain to produce a sensation in that patch of skin. They then tested the effectiveness of the ICMS technique on rhesus monkeys, and to do so, they attached electrodes that delivered sensations to the brain. They found that the monkeys perform tasks equally well when ICMS sensations are sent to prosthetic fingers as they would with natural fingers. They also tested whether the monkeys can sense pressure on the prosthetic fingers as fast as natural fingers can, and the data suggests that the ICMS can be used to create pressure-based feedback in prosthetics that mimics natural feedback. This represents the promise of ICMS in restoring a sense of natural touch to prosthetic users. So, if we further examine the scientific article that I discussed previously, this is a diagram of their experimental design. So, in parts A and B, the rhesus monkeys were first trained to perform and interpret various tasks. The crosses are the response targets, and the yellow circles are the two stimuli intervals. So, if we look at C, when the monkeys were fully trained, arrays were implanted in area 3B of the somatosensory cortex. And lastly, figure D is a map of the receptive field of each electrode and the areas of the skin that were evoked. And finally, when we look at their results, more specifically graph C, we can see that the data shows that the prosthetic finger is behaving similarly to a native finger. More specifically, the prosthetic finger is able to distinguish between these two stimuli just like a normal finger would. And we can reach those conclusions because if we look at the pink curve versus the native curve, the two curves are almost overlapping, which basically means that there's not a huge difference among the two. So, to further expand on the idea of restoring human touch to modern prosthetics, amputees often experience what they call a phantom limb. So, this is a sensory illusion that their missing body part is somehow still present. Biomedical engineers at Johns Hopkins University have created a way in which amputees get to experience that sensory illusion in reality. And the way it works is that they've created this electronic skin that's made out of rubber and is placed on top of prosthetic hands. And it has the ability to revive real sense of touch through the fingertips. A sensor is then placed on the fingertips of the prosthetic hand, and it behaves like normal skin sensors would. It can even detect pain, tactile movements like fine touch, and perception. This is a huge advancement because it gives prosthetics a bigger range to perform tasks, and it makes them more like human hands. I like how this works in tandem with prosthetics that have already been created. So it's an enhancement of what's already been created. So if you made it this far into the presentation, I hope you've enjoyed our discussion on the somatosensory pathway and prosthetics that have been created for those that have been battling spinal cord injuries. Thank you.